Well, surprising new attacks against House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. 3 Democrats running in GOP-leaning House districts are using TV ads to distance themselves from their liberal leader. Take a look.
Here's what I believe. Congress is broken. Both parties, Republican and Democrat, are to blame, and both need new leaders in Washington.
A vote against Nancy Pelosi as Speaker.
Career politicians like Doug Lamborn and Nancy Pelosi have failed. There's only one way to change Washington. Vote them out.
This as the most recent Fox News poll to ask about congressional approval finds just 13% of Americans say they like the job Congress is doing. 78% disapprove. Andrea, I have to laugh when you have Democrats saying, you know, I voted against Nancy Pelosi. It's wonderful, isn't it?
Dem on dem violence. I have a soft spot in my heart for it.
But Democrats, I feel, always have to become less like Democrats in order to get elected. When election season comes around, I find them sounding a lot like Republicans. Whether you're talking about the Second Amendment, whether you're talking about coal, whether you're talking about Obamacare, they love to distance themselves from the far left. Is that what's happening here?
They love to co-opt Republican lingo, and
yes,
they love to cloak liberal policies in Republican speak. And we even saw President Obama do it at his inauguration when he talked about personal responsibility. This administration has nothing to do with personal responsibility. They take ownership of nothing.
Yeah.
I do love their running away from Nancy Pelosi. You know, she's been an excellent fundraising tool for Republicans through the years. But to see her starring in Democrat ads just tells you exactly, I think, the state of the party.
Steve, do you think it's just a rejection of career politicians? Because oftentimes you'll see Republicans in the same way go out speaking out against John Boehner, for example, a rejection of the establishment, and Democrats view Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid as that establishment that people are rejecting right now.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think you alluded earlier to the other part of it, which is that these are Democrats running in Republican-leaning districts. There is nothing more toxic in Republican-leaning districts than Nancy Pelosi. I mean, maybe except for President Obama. So it makes perfect sense. If I were running their campaigns, if I were doing their ads, I would be saying the exact same thing.
Right.
Run as far away as you can from Nancy Pelosi, because people are frustrated with Washington, they're frustrated with incumbency, but they're frustrated with Democrats, particularly Republicans.
That's true. You know, Harris, we have a recent poll by Gallup based on those extremely motivated to vote. And if you look at the poll, 44% of those extremely motivated, we have that up for you, are Republicans. 25% are Democrats. That's a pretty big difference. Is that going to be the big difference in the midterm election voting coming up?
Well, I don't know if those numbers will hold per se, but it does speak to the issue that we're talking about here, and that is the fact that Democrats do seem to morph into something a little bit more moderate, if you will, and closer to Republicans. And as far as Nancy Pelosi is concerned, I mean, she represents the party's brand. I mean, Obamacare, right? Yeah. And she really represents that arm of the party that can raise a ton of money for the party. But, you know, Daniel Scarpinato, who's the spokesperson for the Republican National Congressional Committee, said, oh, these Democrats are hypocrites. The only way that they can really push away from Congresswoman Pelosi is if they stop taking money from what she's raising for the party. And if they push back on those fundraising dollars, that will really show that they don't want to be a part of her. But that's not going to happen. They're not going to push back too much on that brand, because that brand dips cash into their candidates.
Going back to those numbers that you just showed, that margin was very similar to 2010, when, of course, Republicans had strong gains in the House. So if you're asking if that's any indication of what's to come, possibly we could use history as an indication of what may result. I wonder, though, going back to this point about Nancy Pelosi being tied to, of course, Obamacare, if we can just pass this thing so we can all find out what's in it, I wonder if this is more, you know, Republicans running on using Nancy Pelosi so that they can seek that referendum on Obamacare, specifically tying her to that.
Yeah, well, certainly Republicans, I mean, there's been some coverage lately that Republicans have not run on Obamacare as much. That's not true in many of the most important Senate races in particular, and some of the competitive House races. They're using Obamacare, they're using Nancy Pelosi, they're using these things, as Harris suggests, that represent the brand of Democrats and tie candidates to the president and to Washington.
And she represents San Francisco, which is not exactly in tune with average America. All right, well, it's no secret that men dominate politics, but now stunning new numbers show by just how much. Research shows that 71% of 42,000 people who hold office, from the county level all the way up to the White House, are men, and just 29% are women. Now, that's nowhere near reflective of the U.S. population, which is 49% men, 51% women. So, Sandra, this is nothing new. They always talk about women as as minorities. However, we're actually the majority now. And women aren't running as much for office as they used to be. I mean, it's better than it has been, but they have families, they have careers, and frankly, after what parties have done to female candidates like Sarah Palin, I don't blame a lot of women for being apprehensive.
So they just don't want the job. I mean, we have more women graduating from college, more women buying homes than men. Women are definitely coming up there, but it's not showing up in politics, which I think is a very telling story. Problem I have is somebody like Donna Hall, president and CEO of the Women Donors Network, saying the American people understand this, that we need to change the system to have truly reflective and effective democracy. It's statements like that that I think are extremely harmful to society, Andrea, to demand that women be put in office in larger numbers. No, if women want to be there, they'll run and they'll win on their own merit.
Yeah.
But to actually demand that the numbers be there creates big problems.
Yeah.
We've seen it show up in business, in schools, etc.
What are the specific changes? I mean, what are you going to do? Have quotas system for elected officials? Look, I mean, the obvious thing, sitting here being outnumbered as I am, the obvious thing to say, the obvious thing for me to say in this position is that, you know, this overrepresentation of men shows up in just how screwed up our politics are. But I'm not going to say that, because I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that women aren't running for office for the reasons that you all suggest.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other things to do. Men have long sought the kind of platform that elected office gives them to project power, and I think women are concerned with, some women are concerned with these things, but in many cases women are concerned with other things.
I've worked for women in office and I've worked for men in office. Their governing styles are different, I will say. Hat tip to the women get things done much quicker. It's less about ego. But Jedediah, what about party recruitment? Do you think that the Republican Party has done a good job in the past of recruiting women? Are they having trouble? Because Democrats traditionally have done a better job.
I think they could do better with outreach to the female community in general. I mean, in terms of running for office, in terms of voters, in terms of everything. But I would remind people that just because you're a female politician and you're a woman and your anatomy says that, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be an advocate for women. This really is about policy, so you have to look at the person's policy. I don't really care about the gender so much. I care about what they want to do in the community and what their policy is going to look like. And that's what the priority needs to be. Forget about what the anatomy is and start thinking about what they're going to do and what's on their agenda.
Yeah, the reality is, Harris, a lot of women, they are taking care of the children, and it is tough to be a congresswoman and hold office and fly back and forth.
It's tough to do a lot of jobs and be a mom. I mean, I don't think that necessarily discounts any reason why you might want to run. I think you've hit on something there, though, Jedediah, and I see this also from the perspective of race and culture. Just because you share a demographic with someone doesn't mean that you then suddenly become their own and sole priority, or that you'll do more for that group of people than any other.
Exactly.
I would also say that for women, we tend to be, research shows, and Stephen always says I'm kind of a wonk when it comes to this stuff, that women are really driven to solution. They don't enjoy the journey getting there as much as men do. So if that's the case, women may feel like, well, you know what, I don't want to get into policy and politics. Maybe I can change the world in a different way. Maybe that's not the course I necessarily want to take, because people aren't listening to politicians anymore anyway.
And you want people who want the job, so we don't want to be pressuring people to run for office.
I will say this, though, you get Republican women and Democrat women in a room on Capitol Hill, they can come up with solutions much faster than the guys. True story. ISIS now on the verge of a major victory in Syria, battling to take over the Kurdish city of Kobani despite intensifying coalition airstrikes. A live report from the Turkey-Syria border. And do you plan on flying JetBlue? Well, why you may want to keep your seat backs and tray tables and social media in their upright, and locked position. Up next.